Hello everyone, and welcome to the Health GoLIVE webinar series. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Oracle. Just a few housekeeping items to go over. We would like to remind everyone that the Q&A feature will be available, so feel free to send in those questions for the panelists throughout the discussion. Stay on after the webinar to prepare a delicious fall-inspired dish with Chef Matthew Migliori. And with that, I will throw it over to our moderator who joins us from Oracle, Pam Fleury.
Hi, everybody. So I am not Pam Fleury. Pam Fleury is one of our panelists, and she'll introduce herself in a second. My name is Anna Levchuk, and I'm with S&P, and I'm going to be your moderator today. So, hello, and thank you for joining today's Health webinar, Navigating Through the Data Interoperability Challenge. As I mentioned, my name is Anna Levchuk, and I'm the head of healthcare at S&P Global Market Intelligence. I will have the pleasure of moderating today's webinar. And today we will talk about constantly changing healthcare standards and regulations. Managing healthcare data was never easy. 2020 created an even greater data challenge for insurers and providers due to the impact of COVID-19, coupled with the implementation of the 21st Century Cures Act and FHIR standards going into effect. Undoubtedly, ensuring greater interoperability for patient data is an extremely important step to improve healthcare delivery. In the next hour, we will discuss lessons learned around data from COVID-19, importance of the Cures Act, and challenges with the FHIR implementation. We'll start with the panel discussion, followed by the Q&A in the last 15 minutes of the hour. Please submit your questions throughout the call, and we'll ask them at the end of the session. You'll have an opportunity to hear from the industry data leaders representing Oracle, Anthem, and Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield. Without further ado, let's turn to introductions. Pam?
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Pam Fleury. I am at Oracle. I've been at Oracle for over 3 years. I'm the senior director for the product management team in the healthcare portfolio. So we're responsible for 2 platforms that support healthcare from the analytics as well as an HIE perspective. Prior to joining Oracle, I spent over 25 years in healthcare, primarily in the interoperability space, if you will, for revenue cycle and clinical, building out next-gen revenue cycle systems, as well as building a clinical financial analytics application for our providers, and have held many different kinds of positions throughout the years. Really happy to be here and looking forward to our discussion today.
Welcome, Pam.
Yeah, and I'll go next. Rajiv Ranaki, Senior Vice President and Chief Digital Officer at Anthem. A pleasure to be here with all of you this afternoon. At Anthem, my role encompasses the systematic application of data insights, artificial intelligence, and other exponential technologies to transform Anthem, but more importantly, transform healthcare itself to be more proactive, more personalized, more predictive. And I think interoperability in today's discussion is a key building block to that. So very much look forward to the discussion.
Great to have you, Rajiv.
Thank you, Rajiv. This is Vijay Venkatesan. I'm with Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield, as you heard in the intro. Part of my role as the analytics officer there is really to be able to, figure out how do you take data and drive to action, if you will. How do you make that, continuum, a little bit more easier for both of the, internal operations, but also to our external value-based partners who are instrumental in making sure that we are getting the right care in the hands of our patients. Just from a background perspective, I've been both on the provider side of the house and the payer side of the house. So I maybe bring a very unique perspective of, things on the payer side that might be kind of useful or useless, depending on the provider point of view, and vice versa, as to how people look at all of this technology landscape and how it affects more on the everyday care delivery side. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vijay. So let's kick off our webinar with a topic that's on top of everyone's mind, COVID-19 pandemic. Undeniably, we're all taught a lesson. For your respective organizations, what were the lessons learned? And let's hear from Pam first.
Thank you very much. So prior to COVID, as a lot of companies are marching along, we're building out different innovations to solve different portions in different areas within healthcare. So there's a lot of initiatives for home-based care operations, digital assistants, virtual assistant, in addition to wrapping in AI, the machine learning, as well as the NLP as well. So when COVID hit, what we found out is everything was needed now. Oracle, we built, I think many of you know, we built the pandemic response systems that are being used today to really collect and track and help with the patient care aspect for COVID, which medications are most effective, when can a geographic location be safely reopened, all of those things associated with COVID. So we learned a lot of lessons throughout our process in developing those systems. What highlighted was, the data that's needed is beyond the standard clinical data. It's episodic and outcome related. A lot of the data that's needed is not necessarily found in the clinical chart, which is where a majority of data is held, but it's not all the data that's held. All the systems, both mobile as well as portal and non-portal, need to have the ability to be able to communicate with patients. So while there's different applications that are being set up today, it was definitely needed right now to help support COVID and all the care that goes along with it. And a lot of the data that's needed is really called what we would call social determinants, things outside that clinical realm. How many people live in your house? Do you have transportation? All those things. And one of the most important things is patient self-reporting. So that brings into play terminology. We all talk about terminology in healthcare. It's very important from a revenue cycle perspective, from a clinical perspective, mashing those two. Just from an operational perspective, it takes time, but everybody's been able to get along with it. But now you add that patient aspect to it, where they're not necessarily exposed to those complex terminologies that we're all very used to. So having the ability to bring that data in so that analytics can be supplied. So you're able to translate what the patients are self-reporting to support the efforts that you're putting together, in addition to coupling that with all of the terminologies we're used to seeing and using within analytics. In addition, the ability to include AI or do predictions at point of care is something that is being rolled out within the industry. But what COVID has really heightened is that need to have it in operations a lot faster. We're very comfortable with building out models and doing the training. That implementation time frame for a lot of things has taken a bit longer. But with COVID, we've identified, you can do certain things and implement them fairly rapidly in order to support those predictability. And also, the really biggest area is having a very flexible, responsive, scalable, agile platform. So while you have multiple technologies that are being used to support COVID, excuse me, in your normal, general, everyday operations, you really need to have a platform that can support different technologies so that you have that ability to continue that innovation and that scalability that supports the volume of information that's being done, especially in the experience that we've had, especially with the pandemic response systems that were rolled out. It's large volume data, very diverse sets, and there was a lot of effort put into supporting the different types of data that were coming in and then being able to do the analytics on it.
Thank you, Pam. That's such a rich overview. And a few items jumped at me, and I'd love to hear Rajiv's and Vijay's points of view on it. For example, Pam made a great point about many of the important data points not being captured in the clinical record, and also the agility that was brought on by COVID. So Rajiv, Vijay, what did the organizations do to capture the data that you might have not previously captured, and how did COVID speed up your decision making? And I sort of don't doubt that it did speed up the decision making.
Yeah, and so for us, I think sometimes a joke that COVID-19 is our true chief digital officer, because the amount of digital transformation that's happened, I think we could say that there's a silver lining in all of this, that the crisis is accelerated sort of that journey for us. So what it's shown is that, yeah, absolutely, that a vast amount of change, can in fact be implemented in a very short period of time under the right circumstances. In this case, it was kind of a black swan event that kind of drove it, but it's demonstrated that parties can collaborate and make change happen, and make change for the better here. As it relates to the specific question you asked around data, I think there's two points to this. I think it's the data attributes that are missing, but also the data latency. And for us, it was that the latency was probably the bigger issue.
Mm-hmm.
For example, having admissions and discharge data in real time, and being able to act on that, so we can know where our, for example, the Anthem patients are, which hospitals are they admitted to, and how do we take care of them post discharge, and make sure that all can be delivered seamlessly. So that was kind of a big challenge. I think we worked very rapidly to change that, to get some of the admissions and discharge data in real time, and change the way that that kind of happens for Anthem. And then stepping back, what this kind of again highlights is the fact that healthcare data exists in silos, and each silo has its own workflow, and sort of to change all of that is definitely possible, but it starts with kind of creating that kind of common data foundation, with perhaps with this notion that you have to let consumers kind of drive and own their own data, and let them sort of be the architects of this change, along with the ecosystem of healthcare stakeholders that need to rally around that.
Yeah, just to add on to that, Anna, if that's okay, and I'll try not to, kind of speak to the same points that Pam and Rajiv already have covered, but I think I look at it as a kind of a macro level event of both people, of all three things: people, process, technology. So for healthcare, at least, it's been an accelerant in terms of all those three pieces, right? When you think about a remote workforce, how do you manage that at scale? When you also think about processes that were probably antiquated and that had to get I would say reinvigorated in the context of COVID. That was a big thing for us, as well as then the technology. What technologies have to work really well, and what technologies are not adding as much value that we may not need to invest as much in. So the concept of cloud, scalability, agility, the idea of big data, reducing latency, as Rajiv said, all of those are important factors. And also there's a reimagining of how you could do these things in a different way. I know for us, at least, we're already talking about, do we have to build everything? Is there an opportunity to kind of partner and scale as you go? Can we think about different ways to do the same thing better? So all of those are important dimensions. I think it's been kind of a slow moving freight train, but now we're actually, moving it a little faster than we would like. But at the same time, that change management component cannot be underestimated, because there's tremendous change because of COVID in all those dimensions of people, process, technology that we have to calibrate appropriately as well.
Thank you, Vijay. Well, that's why we're talking about interoperability and not reinventing the wheel, and learning from the others. It's interesting to see that some other countries like Denmark implemented the countrywide EHRs, but of course the population of Denmark is much smaller and the healthcare system is different. So unfortunately, it's not an option for us, but it seems like everybody in healthcare is starting to think about the data. And that sort of brings me to the second question that I'd love to hear your thoughts on. So as many, if not all, attendees of the webinar know, 21st Century Cures Act was signed into law in December of 2016, and it is meant to be fully implemented by 2025. The law will incorporate the perspectives of patients into development of the drugs, biological products, and devices, and as well as an FDA decision-making process. Cures is meant to enhance our ability to modernize clinical trials design, include the use of real-world evidence and clinical outcomes assessment. And the hope is that this will speed up the development and review of new medical products. I'd be curious to hear how Cures impacts your work. And this time, maybe we can start with payers' perspective. And Vijay or Rajiv, would you like to kick it off?
I can kick it off, Anna, and I'll just kind of give you, kind of the strategy aspects of this in some ways, because at a macro level, what the Cures Act did was that it allowed us to think about what I'm calling democratization of data at scale by making sure you are removing friction between the touch points of a healthcare delivery system, right? It's how do you create that interoperability of information on demand, whether you're a patient, a provider, a payer, and create that interoperability in a very elegant way to the degree you can. The challenge, however, is, democratization is defined by each entity in their own way. So in some ways, I always say we have a payer democracy, we have a provider democracy, we have a regulatory democracy, we have a government democracy. So each one slightly operates in a little bit of a different frequency in this conversation. My analogy I've always used that, is that when you think about Uber has only two equations, right? You've got a customer platform and a platform for people with cars who want to be drivers, if you will. And then what connects them is that platform between the exchange of flow of, of those two entities. In a healthcare delivery system, it's not that simple. So when you talk about democracy, you have to understand whose perspective are you taking at any given point and who has control over that information flow. In healthcare, it's really the patient who has the ultimate control of their data, and how all these different entities talk to each other is going to be key. And so to me, I'd say that the act itself is a call to action, but then how we evolve on that call to action is going to take some level of, push-pull just to get to that Uberization of healthcare, which is pretty far away. Yes, it has helped Amazon to create, like an Alexa to be your primary care physician or a nurse advice, if you will, but that's still the building blocks. But the longer term goal is to have the patient be at the control of this conversation by getting all that they need, so they have information on the go wherever they are, whenever they need.
Well, I'm glad you're putting patient at the center of it, because up until recently there were discussions who really owns this data, and I'm really glad to see that it is a patient from your perspective. Rajiv, what about Anthem?
Yeah, and so just building on what you and BJ both said, which is kind of let this entire flow start with consumers owning their own data, in particular their own health information. So that's something that we've been working on, and we've made our claims and clinical data and lab data available to our Anthem consumers, if you will, through a FHIR sort of enabled app that allows them to kind of look at everything longitudinally. So we saw that, so that's been there for now a little over 2.5 years, and we're continually enhancing that asset to where we want to make that much more useful for both consumers as well as kind of the parties in the ecosystem. So the Cures Act, incidentally, I think serves as a good tailwind for us in regard to that particular capability. And what we're able to do with that is this notion of call it a personalized data trial. So I see this clinical trials evolving from randomized population level trials to more personalized sort of trials based on your own individual data. So based on clinical lab claims data, we also enable our consumers to catalog and log their other omic related data, so genomic data, biomic data, and other data, all on their devices. So their smartphones, tablets, whatever the preferred mechanism is. And then using kind of federated learning techniques, what we're doing is matching up a profile of a data set to one or more clinical trials, and let the consumers decide which trials they want to opt into, and take the middleman out of the way, if you will, in sort of clinical trial management and recruitment and all the work that happens. And then in so doing, what we want to be able to do is continually monitor the effectiveness of any therapies that are being developed, personalize those therapeutics, and then make it so that real-world evidence and drug post production surveillance of drug effectiveness is just a continuous trial. So There's a program that the FDA launched, called the Sentinel program that, is championing this. So we're participating in that, and we're seeing great early results of how this is all working. So if you fast forward this to, some, point down the road of exponential change in this, particular space, it's very conceivable that therapeutics as we know it, would essentially be transformed to being much more personal and personalized, and, based directly on the combination of your exposomic data, i.e. clinical and, claims data, along with your genomic data. And together, you can basically rewrite the way in which therapeutics are developed in this country.
Fascinating stuff. Not only I learned a new word, exposomic, but I also, I left insurance just a few short years ago, and we definitely struggled with clinical trials recruitment because the data was there, but the implementation and matching wasn't. So it's wonderful to see those developments. And to round this off, Pam, I'd love to hear what your take is. And I expect it to be somewhat different because you're not in the payer business, but at the same time, you do have valuable technology perspective and also and perspective of working across many different companies and maybe even different industries can add to the learning. So, what is Cures Act for you at Oracle?
So it actually enhances what we're seeing internationally. So we have many of our customers are international. So while they may not have a single EHR, they do have multiple EHRs. They do have a single patient portal, if you will. And one of the most important things for them is when they're building that out is to determine what the security is. So the patient has the right to decide who has access to their information. But what it has done is it's opened up the communication between the clinician and the patient. And then if you layer in clinical trials, so in our life sciences area, so I want to sort of build on what both Rajiv and Vijay has said, our experience in the clinical trials, it's the workflow itself that's hard. The technology is there. So in our clinical trials products, we are actively getting ready to have FHIR be part of that. But the workflow that's supportive of clinical trials is very difficult because of the de-identification of patients and that selection criteria. Where that happens, it's a little bit outside of that initial workflow. So getting that together and building upon that. So the bringing in of the genomics as well and using that as part of the trial itself. So if I have a certain gene or a certain protein that I'm looking for, that I'm participating in the specific trial, being able to carry that forward, it's that selection criteria. So what we're seeing on our side is very much what you guys are saying within the payer industry. The technology is there. It's really rounding out that workflow and making sure that we can now modify it so it's more supportive of the workflow that they have, as well as helping enhance and optimize where it's needed. I mean, anybody in the payer area, revenue cycle, that's what we're always doing anyway. We're enhancing and operationalizing workflows and using technology to support that, right? That to be more effective. And as far as the keeping data so that it's not so siloed. In a clinical trial, you're getting data. You're initially getting some data from your EMR. You might be getting data from your lab. As you're going through that, you want to find the relevant data. So maybe you have a device and you're carrying and collecting certain data, but you don't necessarily need to have it every hourly. You're taking thresholds. And maybe you need to go back and look back 5 years in your H&P, and you're looking for something very relevant to qualify that data to that patient, or subject to participate in that trial. So it's a matter of, again, while everybody knows in healthcare, everything's siloed, it's having that capability of going back and pulling back that data as needed and not necessarily harmonizing it, but having a way to translate it. So the CARES Act, what it does in the States is it really forces that to sort of become more the forefront. I think in the international area, more because most areas have socialized medicine, it's a little bit easier, even though they do offer the ability to have various types of systems. It's not one system, but they're able to bring that data up. And the way to do that is through APIs and exchanges. So it's really great to see that in the States, we're settling in on what that exchange is going to be. That will help us do two things. It helps us open up the gateway so that we become more communicative, and also advances innovation. So not everybody's, there's not a single company out there that can do this and no one else can touch it, right? So it enhances and accelerates patient care as well as reducing costs for patient care.
That's wonderful. And since we are on the topic of regulations, and I cannot not talk about FHIR. FHIR has been quite a breakthrough. It continues to be very impactful for the industry. So I'd like to dig deeper into another measure that was put in place to ease data exchange and interoperability. And as we know, the FHIR, the first draft of the standards, was released in 2011, so quite a while ago. However, at the end of 2019, we saw 4.0 release, and that release mandates a few new things. And clearly, a medical community approach is evolving in this area, but we can also see that there are challenges in implementing FHIR. And Pam, just to further what you told us about cures, can you tell us about what challenges you see in implementing FHIR, and how does Oracle solve for it?
Yeah, so FHIR has been created basically to support mobile devices and web APIs. HL7 and batch, and even HL7 formatted batches, is what healthcare has been using for many, many years. And they're very long and very difficult implementations because everybody has a different take on customization. And with FHIR, where we are from a challenges perspective, I'll say one thing: having everybody commit to this is the version, this is the platform that we're going to communicate on, really does help, because in today's world, internationally, you have RIM, you have HL7 2.3, HL7 v3, and there's a big difference between each one of those versions, which makes that resource intensive and also very high TCO. Right? Because you're having to do that maintenance. It's not just that initial implementation, it's the ongoing effort. So to implement FHIR, having the CARES Act identified as version 4.0.1 is great. It's not necessarily completely matured, right? So not all the resources are there. They're still working through on the work groups some of the bundles, which means some of the cause and effect of when you're sending and transmitting messages. I think a couple other challenges for FHIR that I think we'll get through much more quickly than we have with HL7, because we're really marching towards a more standardized approach, is having that ability to provide those mappings and adaptability from HL7 to FHIR, and also the data models themselves. So having that flexible data model that will then support the add-on development as well as your analytics. If you think about, you're trying to stream real-time data, maybe you're on that, you're doing AI predictions to generate alerts while you're building that data over here, that data set's going to look very different than the data you might be getting from a lab or from anesthesia or from another system downstream, or even when you're doing your orders and you're charging. So you have to have a way to have a more flexible data model to support that. So the challenge with FHIR is you have very stringent systems that are your downstream systems, if you will, that sit within their own little data model. What FHIR will do is it will allow you to streamline it, but there is the effort is on bringing that back into the legacy systems, if you will, and having them have that capability to move forward. So the real solution is having a platform that enables you to bring in that diverse set of data and having that ability to not be beholden to a specific data model. So you should be able to support different sets of data models, yet be able to provide analytics and all the other add-on applications through Smart on FHIR development to build out applications and accelerate your innovation.
Thank you, Pam. And having been part of large insurers, I can say a few things about legacy systems. Unfortunately, this is the reality of the world. And I would love to hear what Vijay and Rajiv see on their end, what challenges there might be with FHIR implementation that you've seen, or conversely, what are the benefits of it?
Vijay, you want to go first? Yeah.
Yeah, sure, Rajiv. Thank you. Appreciate that. I look at FHIR, and this is going to sound like a very bad analogy, so bear with me. Fire to me is a phone consumer, like an iPhone or a Google or an Android phone consumer, who only wants the phone for text messages, right? That's all I want to do. I don't like any of the photo features, the camera features, and I just want to text. So the problem with Fire is that it is a great mechanism for exchange of information. But the fundamental problem in healthcare is you don't know who your customer is. Like I, as a member, cannot be identified for all of the different interactions I have with the healthcare delivery system. So if I go to an urgent care, I go to a PCP follow-up, I go to a lab test, I go to get to my pharmacy, then I decide I'm on a vacation, so I go to a pharmacy in Hawaii. Fire isn't going to solve that problem. That's a foundational problem of how do you connect my experience with the healthcare delivery system in a meaningful way. Then you have to put the hat on of a provider. A provider says, I'm staring at the EMR all day long, typing. And now you're telling me I've got 10 more pieces of data that's coming through. And that's how somehow is going to make me more efficient and have a better dialogue with my patient. So I don't think we have really solved what I'm calling the consumer problem, which is a patient wants everything on the go and have portability. You want a provider who wants to dedicate the 15 minutes they have in the most efficient way with the patient. And we have a technology screen that's in front of them, and we give them more and more technology and more information. So to me, Fire can be really great thing to do for reducing information flow, the bidirectional flow, if the foundation of who I am as a patient is understood by everybody in that ecosystem. And to me, that's what we're trying to solve for. So what I always say is that Fire is great, all these things are great, but the underlying structural problem of who am I as a patient, and does everybody know that I was that patient who had those interactions? We haven't solved for that. So it doesn't minimize integration issues or challenges. It only improves the data exchange, which is important. So if you're in an emergency room, you want to get the information flow working, you're kind of the ADT or the admit, discharge, transfer data moving across. That's all great. It's very helpful. But the larger context of are you going to reduce cost, improve quality, improve access, I think we're still far ways away. So I don't mean to be a contrarian, but I'm just kind of putting a very practical, perspective on it by saying it's great strides with technology, but the outcome is still far away in terms of aspirational goals.
Yeah, just to build on that, I'd say, I don't think Fire is a silver bullet, but there's certainly, lots of benefits, for, companies that are using it. For example, at Anthem, as I mentioned, we are making the entire patient history, claims, clinical lab and, device data increasingly available to all of our consumers. So to do that, clearly we need standards because we have to integrate, EMR data from multiple systems. We have to integrate lab data from multiple sources, and potentially even claims data, as the claims API starts to get implemented, starting next year. So it's helped in that regard. It's helped in conveying our information to our provider network and making them aware of the longitudinal history of the patients that they're caring for. And, through the, call it the Fire viewing capabilities that we've developed, that's been, possible to sort of integrate and deliver this information to the right stakeholders at the right time. I think the challenges remain in terms of sort of technically, I think there's issues around, bulk transfers of information. I don't think Fire is, set up to do that. So there's a bit of work that needs to happen to get the data through, a different mechanism, and then apply the standards to it, after, we've acquired the data, so that it's not as efficient. And then we're starting to see this pattern where, certain hospital systems and are providing, Fire as a kind of a read-only resource versus truly enabling bidirectional integration with EMRs. And we see that, that's ultimately going to be limited. We need the ability to get to any data in any system, any hospital system across the country, and be able to integrate into the workflow with the data. And there's work to be done to get to that end state, in addition to some of the points that Vijay was mentioning.
Great, thank you both. monitoring the time, we only have 10 minutes left for panel discussion, and we actually had 3 questions planned, but let's speed up and try to squeeze in 2 of those questions, and then I'd love to turn into to the Q&A session. We're getting a lot of really interesting questions via the Q&A, so we'll get to those. Bear with us. In the meantime, let me ask you this. What are the payers doing to move US core data for interoperability for patients? Vijay, let's hear from you first on this one.
Yeah, so for example, because we're in a value-based arrangement with a lot of our top provider systems in the state, so we are already doing some, data exchange, using APIs. In some cases, it's homegrown. In some cases, we're using the standard APIs in terms of, making sure that the providers have what they need in their EMR. The other thing we're doing, though, is we're building a lot of analytics on top. Because what we find is that if we can combine the claims data that we have with the clinical data that we're getting into our HIE, that together can provide a more holistic view of the patient, that we can then provide that intelligence and those insights back to our, to our hospital systems and all of the participating providers as well. And so I think that's been very helpful for us. So we're continuing to build on that, and we're trying to figure out how ultimately we can create a truly a bi-directional information flow. So it doesn't have to be the start stop, if you will. So that's evolving. It's going to continue to grow, because for value-based to be successful, you have to have a bi-directional transparency. Without that, it's not going to be successful. So we recognize that, and our providers understand that. And now with the EMR vendors being more of a participant in this conversation, before they used to be obstructionists, and I don't mean to offend any EMR vendors on the call, but EMR vendors typically were more of a territorial mindset. Now I think they're being forced to be an open door mindset a little bit. So that's helping with the dialogue of how do you get it back into the physician workflow. So that's kind of how we're looking at it.
Excellent. Let's quickly move on to Rajiv and Pam. Staying on the payer path. Rajiv?
Yeah, so many of the same things that Vijay talked about, not surprisingly, we're doing as well. In addition, we've created something that we call the Health Operating System, or Health OS for short. And that's a new operating system that enables patient and physician collaboration, which integrates in the ability to have FHIR sort of data sets available, via that operating system. So that longitudinal patient histories, insights that are created on top of that history are made available. And we're also planning on opening up the Health OS to developers in the community, so that they could take the standards and, without necessarily having access to the data, create the applications, if you will, that might be used by the provider community. So lots of interesting innovation that's been facilitated by having access to these standards, the standards being adopted more and more, and EMR vendors, partners kind of coming together to say, having these siloed barriers and islands of data is no longer going to work. Let's kind of work together to kind of build this future. So encouraging, I'd say, signs. Long way to go, but optimistic about what we can do here.
Definitely a long way to go. Pam, you have line of sight across different payers, as you mentioned, not just in the US, but internationally. Would you like to add anything from your perspective?
So I think I would just, echo what both Rajiv and Vijay had said. I think in addition to that, what we're doing, on the multiple products that we have, like in the health insurance, we're doing the same thing. We're enabling the APIs from a FHIR perspective, so that does encourage add-on development. On our other customers that are using our platform from both the payer and a non-payer, the payer being the government. So it's a little different than individual payers, but it's the same concept. So while they're supporting their clinical summaries, they're also looking at how to address billing. Even though it's international, there is billing for those that do private, right? We all know that. So, that is also being sourced up. So when the first step is getting clinicians to be able to talk to one another. Second step is opening up to the patients to have the capability to say who has access to their data. Third is really making that billing transparent. And then that falls into clinical trials, it falls into precision medicine, it falls into really supporting medication management. So this is our experience that we've been doing with the systems that we have today across the multiple areas.
Great. Thank you, Pam. All right, so we have time for one more question within the panel time frame before we turn to Q&A. And lots of questions are coming through. Thank you to all who submitted the questions. Please don't stop them. We'd like to have as many great questions to choose from as possible. All right, and the last question of the panel is, it's a two-pronged question. First, what are your organization's strategies for delivering better patient healthcare? And second, better healthcare is only one half of the equation. The second part is research that enables it. Of course, due to privacy, data sharing is limited, which greatly impedes innovation. So the question is, are there any initiatives within your organization undertaken to break the barriers? And let's just follow the same model and start with the payer's perspective. So Rajiv, maybe you can lead the answer to this question, and we'll round it off with Pam's point of view.
Yeah, no, great question. Not just one initiative, but there's multiple programs underway to address what you're asking, Anna. So I'll give you a couple of examples. One is this notion that we call it the 3 Ps, make healthcare more proactive, more predictive, and personalized. And we do that by essentially mining our data and creating sort of the predictions as to what might happen in a person's future healthcare journey. So if Rajiv is likely to develop diabetes 6 months from now, we can predict that. Or if one of our consumers has been in a hospital for any orthopedic procedures, and if they go home, the likelihood of them falling, we're able to predict that. And then there's 5,000 such unique predictions about health that are accurately predicting what might happen. So knowing all of that, we essentially have a program that integrates the ecosystem and proactively engages the consumer in keeping them healthy. And so it's not, the age-old question is like a lot of the lifestyle-based diseases, have the same sort of underlying remedies, i.e., sleep more, eat better, exercise, more, et cetera. But how do you actually, convey that in a way that activates the consumer? So there's initiatives underway that we're taking on to address that problem. It also involves activating the providers in the care, so therefore the integration and interoperability, that's why it's so critical, that if providers reach out, to their patients, i.e. our consumers, the likelihood of members actually responding to that is much higher. So we're doing that. And also, then pulling in community and caregiver resources so that an integrated suite of stakeholders can actually engage continuously. Whereas before, the cost of engagement was very high because humans needed to be deployed to engage. With digital resources, the cost of engagement is zero, if not nominal. And so we can engage our members much more continuously. So very excited about that. And as far as research is concerned, it goes back to the thing I was mentioning earlier, which is around the notion of virtual data trials and making, while keeping the information where it needs to be, have consumers own their own data, but leave the data where it is. If it's on their phone, leave the data on the phone. If it's in an EMR system, or if it's in 10 different places, leave it where it is, but have the ability to deploy algorithms to where the data is, and then federate the insights so that we don't lose sight of the fact that privacy is still, a paramount principle here, but we can still get to both ends, preserve privacy and security, as well as federate the insights and get the learnings and make the learnings available to a broader community to facilitate research.
Absolutely. If all of us opt out from sharing the data, how can we further research? So I heard a few themes. I heard continuity of care. I heard engagement. I heard artificial intelligence used for predictions. I probably missed a few more. Vijay, how are things going in this front at Horizon?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. And I'm sure that everybody on the call is probably doing some fashion of these concepts or implementing some of these. So at Horizon, I think we're being very proactive in this application of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and NLP, and specifically because we are now have a very robust social determinants program where we're applying our non-clinical resources to actually find and target high-risk members in our community. So we're applying this notion of AI and prediction to figure out who these members are. How do you micro target them? How do you get them the help that they need? Similarly, we've just insourced our behavioral health program. So that again requires of how do you proactively manage those members who really need the attention and the care. So the concepts of how do you drive using data, intelligence, insights to get to a very meaningful action, which is really helping people make a different decision with their care, or helping them when they most really need it or at their most vulnerable, is kind of where we're practically applying it. Other areas is COVID-19, because we're more worried about where we are in that COVID-19 landscape. And then as vaccines come out, who are the folks who need the vaccines, right? So when we look at our attributed population, how do we figure out, how do we help our hospitals identify who those high risks are? How do you help them with their planning around vaccines? So that's the emerging area for focus for us with regards to prediction and AI and so on.
Great. Well, CDC just recently said that they don't know the priorities yet, but they will make sure that the healthcare workers will get it first, and that includes everybody in the doctor's office, not just the doctor or nurse. Pam, so how does Oracle help with these challenges?
So they're great questions. So as far as delivering better patient healthcare, a couple of things that both BJ and Rajiv had said we're on the same page. I mean, we're building out. We've been part of the pandemic response systems, which includes the vaccine registry, which is again helping us learn additional information as far as how you need to pull that data, where you need to store it, and how you do the analytics that sits on top of it. What we're doing is we're taking, we're a technology company. We have a lot of tech available to us. So we've taken the technology that we've had, and we're using it based on real life, real world evidence, if you will, or real world data. And we're working with our customers to develop models to do things like take that readmissions within 30 days and do those predictions with data, and working with them based on their workflows to implement specific dashboards, as well as driving alerts to those patients that maybe had a high risk for readmission that didn't show up for their appointment at their cardiac office, so they were ensured to be part of a follow-up call by the case manager or the follow-up person on that end. The other thing is we really are trying to look at taking the tools that we have and embedding them and making them native and fitting each role. So from a research perspective, embedding notebooks into the research platform that we have that would support two roles. One, the researcher who may not have those programming type skills, as well as a data scientist who's used to using notebooks, enabling them to move forward with their roles. So really taking that technology and embedding it based on the workflow to support those initiatives. The other area is, which we think we've all sort of tiptoed around, is the data structures. The data structures are wide and varied, and they're unique to each role within healthcare. But making sure we have a way to place that data, whether it's structured, unstructured, the type of data is within that data model, to enable add-on development through FHIR, through other types of programs, and ensuring that the structure itself is flexible enough so that the initial implementation is not significant, and the ability to add on and continue to accumulate different sets of data really reduces the TCO as you move forward. And I think that the last and other item is ensuring it's a really secure platform. There's not just the HIPAA rules, the GDPR, there's all kinds of rules that are associated with privacy, but it's also at the patient level, right? And what their preferences are as well. So ensure that we have that available along with a high performance compute, and then a way to reduce that total cost of ownership based on the types of data that's being used to support that.
Great. Thank you so much, Pam. So we have 5 minutes. I'm sorry, we have 10 minutes for Q&A, and that's the part of our programming today that is between us and the chef's presentation at 5 p.m. Eastern time. So let's dive right into the Q&A questions. And to our panelists, please feel free to take the question if you think it is something that you can answer. And not all three of us will need to answer these questions. I'd love to cram as many answers as possible. So let's start with this question. What do you see as the key drivers or technologies that will allow patients to truly own their data to unlock the interoperability that you all described? Pam?
So we have some experience with this with some of our customers in other countries, but the key is a platform that allows multiple technologies to sit on top of it and really have the ability, it doesn't matter the EMR you're talking to, it doesn't matter your downstream systems, but have a way to source it. And you're not sourcing all of the data, just a summary of it. And as you need to reach out and grab more data in, you evolve that. But it has to be sitting in an area that enables you to support that. And that's where FHIR, as well as, well, really FHIR is where the direction we're going, but the use of those communications is really needed.
Thank you, Pam. Rajiv, Vijay, I have a question for you specifically, but I just wanted to check if you would like to add anything to Pam's answer.
Yeah, so I think kind of the things like rights and consent management, identity management, federated identity management. Those are the kinds of things that are going to be needed for letting consumers kind of own their data and then say, I'm granting, Dr. Jones access to this information today, or giving my family members access to this information tomorrow. So that's sort of the rough requirement set that exists beyond some of the things that Pam mentioned. So we're investing in technologies like blockchain, for example, to do some of that for us, particularly on federated identity management. And in addition to letting consumers own their own data, it means that consumers have to own their own identity, and rather than that being managed centrally. So there's some things that we're investing in as well.
And then I'll just add to that, one thing that we cannot underestimate is the apprehension of that patient as to how their data will get used by whom. And that
Absolutely.
fear is real and legitimate. So blockchain is a great way to address some of those concerns. But that apprehension exists on how will you use my data and who will get access to it is a big portion of this as well.
Absolutely. In fact, a curious tidbit, speaking of genomic data, it turns out that some of the life insurers ask you in their questionnaires, have you ever done genetic testing? And if your answer is yes, then you're supposed to provide it. So it's quite an interesting way of using the data, not the way any of us are accustomed to using it, but nevertheless a real life situation. All right, next question we have is from David, and it was for Rajiv and Vijay, although of course everybody's welcome to contribute. The question is, how important is alternative data sources for you, like information from K-12 schools? For example, clinical, SDOH, demographic data.
Super critical.
For both of us, but I'll let Rajiv go first.
Yeah, thanks. As I said, super critical. And I think we know that health is more than just about clinical and claims data. I think a lot of it has to do with where we live, access to care. So social drivers of health are critical data source, as well as data from sort of multiple sources longitudinally. We miss data from infancy in a lot of cases because that's missing, and a lot of cases. So having all that together into this notion that that's what drives the person's whole health, super critical, and one of the most important initiatives we're taking on in Anthem.
Yeah, I think whole person care means you need to have a whole person data set. And whole person data set is about retail, your spending, your buying, your eating, your medication, your all of the other aspects that make you you. And so that's going to be I would say that's where the industry is moving. We at Horizon buy external sources of data like SDOH, retail data. We also look at publicly available data, government data. So there's a lot of data we put together, because for population health as just the starting point, you need to understand your population and just everybody articulated, depending on where you live, your access to care is determined by that in some ways. And that's an important dimension.
Great, thank you. Prashant is asking, with so many EMR systems, how it impacts interoperability? Is there any discussion / trend to move toward common EMR, or will payers keep building interfaces for all such EMR systems?
This is Vijay. I'll just start it off, and this again will be a contrarian opinion. I would like to be in a world where there is no EMR, because the initial goal of an EMR was to do clinical data exchange. It became a financial application and everything geared towards that now. Revenue cycle is hosted off of an EMR in a lot of ways. So the goal is that eventually, the idea of one EMR. So my hope is that the blockchain technology can really create what I'm calling a functional EMR on the go, which will tremendously change how we do this world of information exchange with each of the parties involved in the ecosystem. But that's not a popular opinion, because every organization has invested, billions of dollars putting in EMRs. And so it's going to be a slow transition.
I just want to add, I think the trend will be a portable patient record. So kind of building up what you said. So for a good example is, when we all get to travel again, we go to places, we need shots. We're not going to our primary care, we're not going to urgent care, we're going to a place that specializes in countries A through Z and the types of shots you need in order to attend. So, and that's not necessarily brought on your personal record. So when you go to your checkup, you don't tell them you probably don't, if you're like me, you're not going to remember, oh yeah, I got some shot because I went to Morocco or wherever, and yeah, I don't know what it was. So it's that need of a personal health record to really be supportive of your individual care and not in the interest of the enterprise.
It's great, and I think it's also super important for urgent care and things like that, where you don't have time to pull the records out of the box that's somewhere in your house. So that's great. Rajiv, would you like to add anything, or shall we move to the next question?
Yeah, I mean, it's unrealistic, I think, to have a single EMR in this country. So yeah, I think what we're doing now is wrapping and creating interoperability, around these systems. And with consumers driving that change, I think it's got more of a chance to succeeding. And then the fact that we're adopting FHIR and standards like that also help. But I think it's unrealistic to think that we're ever going to do away with EMR systems.
Great, thank you. So unfortunately, we only have 2 minutes left. So I'm going to ask this question quickly, although this is a lengthy question, and we may have time for just one person to answer. So the question is, from the patient perspective, people are looking for a single contact to collate data and give recommendations. We are talking here about payers taking this on, but also hospitals, EMR, disease group targeted care companies. How can these groups collaborate? Who will be the final owner to support data collection, standardization, and eventually patient care personalization?
I can take that. If you, I'd say, this is going to take a village. I don't know that there's any single party that could say we're going to own all of this and make this happen. I think we all have to agree on a common framework for collaboration, and set in motion a set of guiding principles around how the collaboration needs to happen. For example, that consumers own their own data, and rights and consent, and all of that has to be managed very transparently with consumers making all those decisions. And with sort of that foundational principle in place, I think there are some players that naturally have access to more aggregated data than others, and I think it becomes their obligation, more disproportionately than others, to then create the longitudinal views based on that information, to make those insights then available to the entire population. Not just sort of treat those things as proprietary to their own company, but make it freely available to everyone that could benefit from it. So in some ways, I think that becomes the obligation of companies like, Anthem and Horizon, other insurance companies, because we see more of that longitudinal information. I think it becomes the obligation of companies that are in the life sciences space that see longitudinal information about their patients around, kind of drug discovery and real world evidence. So I think, there are some examples of how this could come together. But at the end of the day, healthcare is a fragmented ecosystem that needs to be unified with common data, common standards, and some common guiding principles oriented around consumers.
Great. Well, unfortunately, we are at time, and this concludes our Q&A session. Big thanks to our panelists for their insights, to attendees for their time and questions, as well to our health team and Oracle for making this webinar possible. And now let me pass this on to the health team for further programming.
Thank you to Pam and to all of our panelists. If you'd like to continue the conversation, please join us on Twitter. And now, please welcome Master Chef Matthew Migliori.
Hey everyone, how are we doing today? So I am your post-seminar chef for the evening. So today we're going to be making something that's super nice for the holidays. We're going to be making a roasted delicata squash that we're going to hit with a little bit of brown butter, a little bit of maple syrup, a small quinoa salad, and a homemade cultured cream. Now, I love this dish for the holidays. Obviously, squash is super seasonal for this time of year, especially being in New York. The quinoa gives it like a nice little acidity, and the cultured cream is super easy to make. All you take is just a little bit of heavy cream, some buttermilk, and let it sit out at room temperature for like a couple days. It's super nice to make. It's basically homemade creme fraiche. So first, what we're going to do to start out, we're going to make our quinoa salad. So this is white quinoa. Okay, I suggest using white quinoa for this application. Super easy to cook. I basically boil it like pasta. Okay, so I get a good amount of water up to a boil, light salt. I add in my quinoa and I boil it for 11 minutes on the dot. Okay, and as soon as that's done boiling, what I do is I run it through a colander right under cold water to stop the cooking process. Okay, so that's what makes it nice and fluffy, so it can take on a good amount of vinegar. All right, so first thing I'm going to add to my quinoa. So I have about, I want to say, a cup and a half of cooked white quinoa. It basically started as a quarter of a cup of dry quinoa before cooking. So I'm going to add about 3 tablespoons of white balsamic vinegar. Okay, next I'm going to add an equal part of avocado oil to this. Now, I like using avocado oil for this because it's a neutral flavor. It doesn't impart any like bitterness such as olive oil, and it's nice and clean. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and give this a little mix. Right? So we're going to add about a pinch of salt. So that's about, I would say, half a teaspoon of salt. We want to add a little bit less than we think that we need because we can only add to it and we can't go backwards. Okay, so we don't want to add too much to it. Okay, so we're going to give this a little mix. And again, we have our fat from the avocado oil. We have a nice acidity from the white balsamic vinegar. Okay, we're going to take 1 lemon. We're going to add the zest of half a lemon into the salad. Okay, so set this to the side real quick. And I'm going to add just a little bit of lemon juice to the salad. It gives it a nice clean flavor. It doesn't give it like that really super sharp acidity from vinegar. It cleans it up nice. So I'm going to cut 1 cheek off of this lemon here. Okay, squeeze it right into my bowl. Right, give this a little mix. Okay, and we're just going to give it a little taste, see where we're at in seasoning. Okay, beautiful. I'm going to add a little more salt, just a touch more oil. Perfect. Give that a mix. And you see it's kind of soupy, right? That's what we want. We want it to be nice and dressed. Okay, we want it to be nice and juicy. We have the oil, we have the vinegar, the little bit of lemon. Okay, it's all good stuff. All right, so this is about 2 sprigs of picked and washed parsley. So I'm just going to run through a little knife handling technique with everybody. So using a chef knife, I'm going to go ahead and pinch the back of the knife with my fingertip and my index finger and my thumb. I'm just going to wrap my middle finger, my ring, and my pinky right over. Okay, I'm going to place the blade right down on the board. I'm gonna go ahead and just press the parsley against my knife like this, creating a little ball. And then I'm just gonna make little motions, slicing motions back and forth to create what the French like to call a chiffonade. Okay, you might have heard the term chiffonade when using parsley or basil, but this is a good technique to use it on more delicate greens, such as cilantro, parsley, chives. Okay. All right, now we're gonna take it one more way. Bring that back to a pile. And you notice I'm doing nice long strokes. Okay, the reason why is because we don't want to do that up and down motion. We don't want to bruise our herbs. Okay, just like that. And then right into our quinoa salad. Okay, give this a mix and one final taste. All right, and the parsley is going to add like a nice little herbaceousness to it. Right, it's really going to make it pop. Beautiful, perfect. So next thing we're going to move on to our cultured cream. Now again, cultured cream, basically the term culture just means letting it live in the temperature danger zone, allowing the bacteria to grow, okay? So this is basically just 3 parts heavy cream and 1 part buttermilk. You leave it in a container with a lid on, and you leave it out at room temperature, about 65 to 70 degrees overnight for about 12 hours, 12 to 24 hours. And what happens is that the milk fats are going to start to solidify, okay? And you're left with like a nice kind of like sour cream, right? So basically it's sour cream, or otherwise creme fraiche. Okay, so I have just a little bit in the bowl here. So I'm just going to take my whisk, and because it's predominantly heavy cream, it's really going to catch the air, so it's going to start to whip nicely. Okay, so we're just going to whip this in our bowl just for about 20 to 30 seconds. Okay, it's going to start to loosen up, but again, it's also going to start catching a lot of that air, and it's going to start to get a little bit stiffer. Okay. So again, this is also very bland. Okay, this has no salt, so we're going to go ahead and add about half a teaspoon of salt, because again, we can only go forward, we can't go backwards in seasoning. Okay. Okay, next, I'm going to take another cheek of lemon here. Right into the bowl there. Right. Okay. It's super important. You're going to notice me always tasting. Okay, it's really important. Whenever you make your food, you always want to taste it as you go. Really helps you develop all the flavors. Just a touch more salt. Okay. And then just for our spice, we're going to add just a little bit of allspice to this. I would say about a 1/4 teaspoon of allspice. Okay, that's going to give it like that squashy, pumpkin-y, kind of like a fall vibe. Okay, beautiful. So that's good to go. All right, so next, so I went ahead and I pre-roasted some of our delicata squash. So basically what a delicata squash is, it's like an elongated squash. The skin is actually super edible. So like most like gourds or squashes, you have to peel them, but delicata, you really don't. The skin is really nice. So I basically just cut it right in half, took out the seeds, tossed it with a little bit of canola oil or avocado oil and salt, and I roasted it at 425 on a baking tray for about 20 minutes until it was nice and tender, okay? But what we're gonna do is we're gonna pick this up in a cast iron pan with a little bit of butter and some maple syrup. All right, so I have my pan here ready to go. Okay, we're gonna add just a couple tablespoons of oil. Not too much though, okay? We just want to add a little bit, so when we add the butter doesn't burn on contact. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and add about 2 tablespoons of butter. Let this get nice and foamy. All right. So for one serving, I'm going to do about 5 pieces. This is a really nice side dish, a really nice appetizer for a holiday meal. And honestly, you can cook the squash the night before, right? And the day that you plan on serving it, you can pick it up in a pan with a little bit of butter and a little bit of maple syrup to finish. Okay. So again, I'm on like a medium to low heat. Okay, I just want to sear all the sides, make them look nice. Again, this is kind of like the color that we're looking for here, a nice caramelization. So what's happening in the pan now, the butter's starting to turn a little bit brown. And that's perfectly fine because brown butter, it's super nutty, very flavorful, kind of sweet. It's really, really nice for squash. All right, so we give it about 30 seconds on one side. After the 30 seconds on the second side, I'm gonna go ahead and shut off the heat and just add in about 2 tablespoons of maple syrup. And the maple syrup is going to make a really nice glaze on the squash. It really imparts a lot of sweetness that this squash kind of lacks. Okay, so it's super, super nice, nice and glazed, very beautiful. Okay, now my heat is off, so I'm going to go ahead and just toss these around a bit, let them get nice and glazed. Okay. You can see that glisten on the squash, right? All right. All right, so whenever something comes off the stove, right, we just want to hit it with a little bit of salt, okay? Nice and seasoned. All right, and before I plate, so I went ahead and I made, this is a caramel, okay, but this is a savory caramel. So the caramel is basically, you take equal parts sugar to water, okay, you add that in a pot, you make a slush, and you cook that down to about 325 degrees, which is the hard crack stage of caramel, okay? You're gonna notice it getting nice and amber in your pot, and once you achieve that nice like dark amber color, you're gonna add about 1/4 cup of fish sauce. Now, fish sauce is basically fermented anchovy. And I know it smells really bad once you open the bottle, but I'm telling you, it's super delicious once it's cooked out in this caramel because you have your sweet and your savory all in one jar, okay? All right, so now for plating. So I'm gonna take some of that cultured cream with some of that allspice, okay? Make a nice little dollop right in the middle of the plate. You can take the bowl of your spoon, just kind of spread that out, make a nice little circle. And I'm gonna plate this in a way where, you know, if I'm sitting on one side, you're sitting on the other side of the table. I'm gonna plate it very organically. So if we're sharing it, you take something from that side, I take squash from this side, we both share the same experience. I think that's super important in plating food. Okay, next we're gonna take our delicata squash. And you can be very subjective about your plating. You can plate it however you like. Okay. Okay, and then just a little bit of our fish sauce savory caramel here. Just a nice little drizzle all over the squash and all over the cultured cream. Really nice sweetness to this dish. All right, and last but not least, we're gonna go ahead and top this with our quinoa salad. Okay, so I just like putting this in little pockets. Again, you have your nice creamy cultured cream, has a good amount of acidity, that really nice allspice for that autumn flavor. Okay, super seasonal delicata squash, cooked down with butter, cooked down with maple syrup, right? And then finally our savory fish sauce caramel to add that extra shot of sweetness. And then just to finish, I have a little bit of Malden sea salt here. Just gonna do a couple touches on our squash, okay? Salt gives it a little more texture and it makes it nice and seasoned. Okay, everyone. So there you go. Our beautiful roasted delicata squash with our maple butter glaze, savory fish sauce caramel with our homemade cultured cream and 5-spice, and a delicious white balsamic and quinoa salad. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you had a good time, and I really hope you get to try this over the holidays. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Have a great rest of your week.